I'm David Taub. In this GV Wire special, we talk to two Fresno women who tell the stories of how their families were able to escape Nazism in Eastern Europe in the late 1930s. We hear the stories of Hannah Krebs and Eva Maiden as young girls, how their families were able to get out of Germany and Austria and make it to America.
I was born in Vienna, Austria. My parents were both doctors, and I was 3 years old, my brother was 8 years old. It was quite a dilemma for them when patients were calling up and they were no longer allowed to practice. Their licenses were immediately canceled because they were Jewish. My father needed to be in hiding because he in particular was sought after by the Nazis for imprisonment. My mother was more free to be able to at least secretly at night, see patients. That she would go with a large purse, which actually contained her medical instruments, and visit patients that called, patients of many other doctors who had already been imprisoned or worse. Being in Austria, my parents, of course, were able to keep track of what was happening in Germany. It was quite alarming, and yet it was a great shock when Hitler and his forces actually marched into Vienna, which was in the month of March, 1938. He saw Austria as a country that should belong to him because he had in fact been born in Austria and had delusions about that. And the changeover from a democratically elected socialist government in Vienna to a Nazi government occurred just overnight, immediately. My parents were both physicians, but my father had a half-time job working for the city of Vienna, and he was immediately fired. And also the licenses to practice were taken away from my parents immediately. However, my mother, as a woman, was able to continue to take care of patients, in particular as a pediatrician, to take care of child patients, which was very important because there was an epidemic of scarlet fever at the time. My brother suffered the most. He immediately had a Nazi teacher instead of the Jewish teacher who happened to be his teacher in public school. And this teacher discriminated against the Jewish children. Eventually, and pretty soon, the Jewish children were locked out of school and were mostly hidden at home for as long as that was possible. There were edicts for the arrest, mostly of men. And so my father went into hiding. His closest friend, who had been a medical school colleague, hid him in his pantry. He had a patient who was working in the city offices of Vienna who informed him with telephone calls when she was typing papers indicating that it was time for the Nazis to go into a certain neighborhood where they would be arresting Jews. And when it was our neighborhood, she called and said, "Herr Doctor, you have to disappear fast." And so he went to this colleague who was a Christian, and the colleague and his wife hid him, and that happened several times over. I understood only that the safe place for me was to be home and that I wasn't to go outside anymore. There was a Viennese organization which had always worked on behalf of the Jewish community, arranging for holidays and doing normal things, and now they became the refugee organization. It was called the Kultusgemeinde, which is translated as cultural association. And what they were doing was trying to find places where people could escape and flee and make a new life somehow. This was actually very difficult. Mm-hmm. The American government was quite restrictive at the time about refugees. So. And it was common for there to be very long lines at the American consulate because of the better American economy and the freedom, it was the destination that the most people were seeking out. And it was very difficult to obtain the papers for that. We were very lucky that eventually it did happen. We were actually enabled to move to Switzerland because a cousin was the chief rabbi in Zurich, in German-speaking Switzerland. And yet we had to leave without money and without any clothes except those on our backs. It was already December, and by January, activities toward imprisoning all of the Jewish men were almost completed. We were able to fly. We had a relative in Zurich. He was a rabbi, and he was helping many Jewish people to escape. And we didn't have any extra privileges more than other people in his eyes, so he did arrange for our safe passage on a flight to Zurich, which is just an hour away. And he hosted us for a couple of nights, and then at that point, my father, who had been ill and had been unable to get treatment because no Jew was safe even to go to a hospital, he had advanced appendicitis. He went for care in Switzerland, and we were away from him for 3/4 of a year because of complications. And so there were the three of us, my mother, brother, and I, and we found hospitality with a generous Swiss family. No one paid them, and they were a family of 5. They already had plenty of mouths to feed, but they somehow managed to help and feed us. And I was sent to a Montessori school, which was specifically for Jewish refugees. So I attended nursery school there. We were able to be safe in Switzerland, but there was a negative feeling toward the crowding of refugees arriving, and we didn't feel very welcome. There was a kind of welfare fund, but my mother had to apply for it repeatedly, and it always accompanied the suggestion of why don't you get out of here? There's never going to be citizenship in Switzerland. There's never going to be work for you. Get out. Oh yes, we had many relatives left behind. Both of my parents had been born in sort of a disputed territory, but mostly it was considered Poland. And the conditions there were very poor, and so they moved. Both of the families, before my parents knew each other, moved to Vienna for a better opportunity for themselves and their children. It was constantly talked about, and it was common for German-speaking refugees to show up and talk to this 2-doctor family. That was they naturally moved in that direction. I became more interested in the whole issue of what actually happened to the Jews in the Holocaust when, after the television program Holocaust was on in the 1970s, the public began to be very interested in what happened, which we had always thought it was something to be kept kind of quiet. It's important for people to realize that a political movement that begins with propaganda can actually end up becoming a terrorist state. And that's something that everyone needs to watch out for, even Americans. Well, yes, I lived a long time in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've always had strong feelings against war as a solution for differences, and I've been active in the peace movement, along with raising 2 children and a career as a marriage and family therapist. So in my busy life, I didn't pay a lot of attention to this past history that we're talking about until there was a very popular television program, a week-long program called The Holocaust, and everybody was talking about it. And I began to realize that I had pushed thoughts about it away, and I needed to think again about what happened to me and what happened to relatives and the many lost family members as well. I became more conscious of it. And around this time, there was a recognition that people who had been in the camps and now were in the United States, in San Francisco, the Jewish Family Service began to realize that these people needed a different kind of help. They needed help from someone that understood what they had been through. And I navigated toward that and included in my work, working with Holocaust survivors, which became quite a large movement all around the Bay Area, in which we began to speak, and the political factors, the losses we had experienced, things we had held in, began to emerge. And I think it was important for Americans to realize that this could happen anywhere if false propaganda was perpetrated and people were particularly vulnerable to that. And that Holocaust history is an important lesson, even though it was thankfully now long ago. We have something to learn about it even today. I think it's very important for teachers to emphasize democracy and what it is, and for children to learn the admittedly very painful lesson of what can happen when democracy vanishes and fascism takes place. And we all need to know the difference and vote accordingly.